Light middleweight is an interesting division in boxing. Historically, it has been a division that fighters move through rather than staying in for very long. 154 pounds is just between two of boxing's most prestigious divisions, welterweight and middleweight. So while great boxers like Leonard, Duran, Benitez, Hearns, Trinidad, and McCallum have all spent some time and won titles in this weight class, they didn't stick around to defend their belts more than a handful of times. Tim Tszyu has spent almost all of his 24-fight career at 154 pounds, and he picked up the WBO light middleweight title in March of 2023. In this video, we'll dive deep into his style and try to understand whether the Australian has what it takes to become a modern great. We'll start first by talking about his ring craft. Tszyu is a pressure fighter, which means he wants to move forward and force his opponents against the ropes or ideally trap them in a corner. Of course, his opponents don't want to let that happen, so let's look at the three basic movement options available to a fighter to avoid getting stuck on the ropes. Obviously, the ropes prevent them from moving backwards, so the first two options are to either move laterally to the left or to the right, and this can be done in a variety of ways, like pivots, L-steps, etc. The third option is to move into the opponent, and that's usually done by either throwing punches to get them to back up, or by entering the clinch and trying to physically force them backwards. The thing that makes Tim a good pressure fighter is that he has specific tools to deal with each of these three movement options. He doesn't just walk forward and assume his opponent will consent to having their back against the ropes. Rather, he methodically cuts off their escape options and gradually removes their ability and desire to do so. First, let's look at how he uses the left hook to cut off opponents who are looking to move laterally to the right. You'll often see Tim leading with his left hook, and earlier in the fight, he throws it almost as often as he does his jab. The more success he has with his left hook, the more he can start mixing it up with his jab to keep the opponent guessing. Hooking off the jab is fundamental boxing, but for Tim it serves an important strategic role of forcing opponents backwards and making them hesitant to move in the direction of one of his best weapons. So what about just moving to the right? Well, this is where it's important to note that Tim is quite the puncher, and moving consistently to the right just puts you in line for his power hand. Next, we'll look at how he uses the threat of his right to cut off escapes to the left. It doesn't have to be a big sweeping punch or hook. Here we see him moving quickly to cut off the ring, forcing Tony Harrison to have to move right. One of the built-in advantages of having your opponent against the ropes is that it's often more difficult for them to move without squaring up their stance. The moment Harrison steps his left foot out to move, Tim fires his right hand straight down the middle, catching Harrison, standing square. With the left hook cutting off one direction and the right hand cutting off the other, opponents have one final option to get off the ropes, moving forward. Now we'll look at Tim's use of back steps. The thing about trapping an opponent against the ropes is that while it cuts off their ability to move backward, you still can hop back whenever you want, allowing you to be the one dictating the range. When the opponent tries to throw, Tim can hop back just out of range, causing them to miss, and then move right back in to punish them. His left hook plays another important role here because he often runs his opponent onto it when they try to move into him. This works well for a number of reasons, but one simple one is that mechanically, a proper left hook involves leaning weight back onto the rear leg, so the left hook will naturally be there when he's hopping back to avoid getting smothered up close. Another very important tool for stopping his opponent's attempts to stifle him in the clinch is his frames. His lead hand or lead elbow push opponents off just enough for him to keep landing punches. Again, we see how he is able to dictate the range and force opponents to fight his fight. This is also where Tim can sneak in a lot of uppercuts and body shots. Tim's rear uppercut is one of his best punches, and it often sneaks up to the chin, even when opponents don't think there's enough space between them to land it. Often one of the most frustrating things about modern boxing is the way many fighters seem to automatically consent to a ceasefire on the inside, but Tim's frames tell his opponents that he's not going to let them have a break that easily. Even if his opponents manage to wrap him up, Tim is a refreshingly active fighter up close. So now we'll take a look at his inside fighting. Even if he's not always overwhelming opponents on the inside, he's perfectly comfortable there. He's very good at getting his arms free to punch, and you'll see him swinging opponents around a lot to prevent a static clinch position that would cause a referee to intervene. Here, Gausha tries to get off the ropes by looking to clinch, but runs into a strong frame that Tim uses to create space for his left hook. When Gausha again looks to wrap up the left arm and head, Tim immediately swims his head out the back and comes over top with the right hand. Gausha is still clamping down on the left arm though, so Tim uses it to whip Gausha around, meeting him with a vicious uppercut to the body that hurts him. Now that we've seen the ways Tim Tszyu gets his opponents to the ropes and keeps them there, let's look at what he does to take advantage of the position. This part is about Tim's pressure countering. First, Tim doesn't start by immediately swarming. He's very patient with his pressure, and he knows that a cornered fighter can often be a dangerous one, especially early in the fight. So we see him waiting for his opponent to make the first move so that he can quickly counter them. One of his best counters is using the shoulder roll to deflect the right hand, and then immediately countering with a rear uppercut. The upper body rotation of the shoulder roll flows naturally into the rear uppercut like the winding and unwinding of a coil. He's also willing to enter into 50-50 exchanges, trusting in his power to win out. Combined with his counters, his willingness to take one to give two or three shows his opponents that they can't just throw to get him to back off. Tim is committed to having the last word in exchanges, and is willing to let the firefight escalate if it's being done on his terms and in his preferred position. One specific punch that his opponents have to worry about a lot is his chopping right. Opponents are often looking to use their head movement to find a way to safely escape, but Tim will use his left hand to track the head movement, allowing him to change the trajectory of his right hand, chopping it down to catch them ducking. Gradually, as Tim is able to get his opponent against the ropes for longer and longer stretches, he starts to up his volume. Sometimes he will throw a lot of non-committal shots in between his power punches, getting opponents to cover up and respond so he can find ways around their defense. It's in these spots where you start to see Tim's excellent shot selection. He doesn't just wing mindlessly, but observes his opponents carefully to better choose his punches. This is Tim Tszyu's A game. Everything starts coming together at this point, his left hooks, crushing overhand rights, and a steady diet of uppercuts. But he knows how not to lose his patience. He takes some of the steam off his punches when he needs to so he doesn't tire himself out, but he still occupies his opponent's defense. No fighter is perfect though, and we've already seen some of Tim's vulnerabilities. In this last part, we'll look at Tim's weaknesses. He's pretty good at slipping and parrying his opponent's first jab, but when they double up on it, he usually gets caught. Given that Tim is often reacting to the jab, it creates opportunities to set him up with bigger shots by feinting the jab. This is how Gausha was able to put him down in the first round of their fight. A small feint drew out Tim's slip and counter, but slipping to the outside just put him in line for Gausha's right hand. Opponents looking to avoid getting backed up to the ropes have had success pivoting with their jab, so a really competent outfighter would likely be able to keep him off his A game. In general, the way to respond to someone looking to pressure is not to wait to move laterally until your back is against the ropes, but to circle near the center of the ring. Often this means first moving into the opponent and then pivoting past that, which Mendoza was able to do a few times. It remains to be seen whether Tim Tszyu will ever get the opportunity to fight Jermell Charlo, but more interestingly, Terence Crawford was recently named mandatory challenger for the winner of Tim Tszyu's upcoming bout with Sebastian Fundora. Perhaps it's just because I would be pretty confident in a Crawford win were they to match up, but I'm actually more interested in seeing Tim Tszyu fight Israel Madrimov, who just picked up the WBA 154-pound title on March 8th. You can watch my breakdown of Madrimov's win here, and let me know in the comments how you think things are going to play out at light middleweight.